It was a morning that started like any other in Washington, D.C., the capital bathed in a pale golden sunrise, the air crisp with winter chill. But inside the Supreme Court of the United States, the atmosphere was anything but ordinary. Attorney General Pam Bondi, appointed under President Donald Trump's second term, walked through the marbled halls with a sense of quiet determination. Her blonde hair was neatly tied back, her navy blue suit sharp and deliberate, signaling not just style, but readiness. Today wasn't just another hearing. It was the case, the one the whole nation had been talking about for months. At the heart of it was Senator Elizabeth Warren, once a leading progressive figure, now standing trial for alleged abuse of federal power. Accusations had emerged that Warren had directed federal regulatory agencies to target specific political opponents and private companies that didn't align with her ideology during her brief leadership of the Accountability Oversight Task Force, a unit she created during a brief Democratic majority hold. Several whistleblowers from inside the task force had testified to coercion, data manipulation, and politically motivated investigations. But it wasn't until one particular internal memo, coded Project Equinox, was leaked to the press that the story truly exploded. President Trump, who had returned to office in a shocking 2024 election twist, had immediately directed the DOJ to investigate. And Bondi, known for her no-nonsense courtroom ferocity and sharp legal instincts, was the tip of the spear. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, senators, aides, and even former justices filled the benches. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the scene was being live-blogged and dissected by every major network. Across America, citizens sat glued to their screens. Warren, looking composed but rigid, sat at the defense table flanked by an army of lawyers. She wore her signature glasses, scribbling notes furiously as Bondi took her place at the podium. The people of the United States, Bondi began, entrusted Senator Warren with oversight, not dominance. With power, not weaponry. Today, we will show beyond any reasonable doubt that she betrayed that trust. She paused for effect, her voice echoing off the walls of the chamber. In a democracy, you do not silence opposition. You do not target Americans for their beliefs. And you certainly do not manipulate the engines of government to crush dissent. A murmur rolled through the room like a distant wave. Bondi began her opening statement with the timeline, detailing Warren's brief tenure over the task force. She highlighted anomalies in enforcement patterns, carefully cross-referencing them with known affiliations of targeted individuals and businesses. But the moment that sent shockwaves was when she introduced a never-before-seen witness, a former aide to Warren whose identity had been kept sealed for their safety. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bondi said, "this is Claire Robbins. She worked directly under Senator Warren and has first-hand knowledge of Project Equinox." The courtroom stirred again. Warren's lawyers objected vocally. "This witness was never disclosed," cried lead defense attorney Marla Kent. Bondi turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the witness has agreed to testify under executive protective privilege. We can submit sealed documents for review. The information she carries is time-sensitive and critically relevant." After a tense 5-minute sidebar, the judge allowed it. Claire, visibly nervous but resolute, walked to the witness stand. She looked directly at Warren before turning to Bondi. "Tell us, Ms. Robbins," Bondi began. "What was Project Equinox?" Claire's voice cracked slightly. It was a list, a secret list. Companies, politicians, donors, even school districts that Senator Warren believed were counterproductive to the American equity mission. We were instructed to collect dirt, create pressure, and make them comply or disappear from influence. Gasps, audible gasps, the kind that usually come only in TV dramas. Warren's face tightened. Her attorneys scrambled. "And who approved this?" Bondi asked. Claire paused. "Senator Warren. Directly," she said, and I quote, "If they want to play politics, so will we." The courtroom descended into chaos. Reporters leapt from their seats. The judge pounded his gavel. Bondi didn't flinch. Her eyes never left Warren. America had just heard the first real nail in the coffin. And it was only the beginning. As the courtroom settled back into a tense silence, the judge motioned for Claire Robbins to continue. The prosecution had struck a nerve. An insider witness, an alleged secret blacklist, and now, the heavy implication that Senator Warren had knowingly weaponized her office. Pam Bondi moved forward with the precision of a chess grandmaster, her every word sharpened by years of courtroom experience. "Ms. Robbins," she said, her tone calm but penetrating. "How were these targets selected?" Claire took a breath. Senator Warren's office would receive reports from progressive think tanks and advocacy groups. If a company donated to Republican causes, or even questioned federal policies on ESG standards, carbon regulation, or gender equity education, especially in schools, they were flagged. Bondi narrowed her gaze. "And once flagged, what happened?" Claire nodded, as if finally relieved to be telling the truth. "We'd loop in federal departments. Sometimes the SEC, sometimes OSHA, even the IRS. The message was, pressure them, audit them, investigate. We didn't need to convict them. We just needed to slow them down, tie them up, ruin their public image." The defense immediately objected again, this time accusing the prosecution of speculative hearsay. But Bondi was prepared. "Your Honor," she said as she clicked her remote, "we have supporting documentation, over 112 email chains, calendar appointments, and task force memos signed off by Warren herself." The courtroom screens lit up. Dates, names, federal agency connections, internal emails with subject lines like, "Push harder on these three," and "Senator wants updates on ESG dissidents." The judge allowed it. And now the room was no longer just watching a trial, it was witnessing history. Bondi pivoted again. "Ms. Robbins, were there any repercussions for not complying?" Claire's voice dropped. "Yes, I saw 2 staffers fired. One for asking too many questions. The other for leaking concerns to a House committee staffer. Senator Warren labeled them internal threats." Bondi's eyes didn't leave Warren. "Did you ever feel like you were doing something wrong?" Claire swallowed. "Every day." The judge called a recess. Reporters bolted from the courtroom like racehorses from the gate. Cable news broke into programming. "Breaking, whistleblower says Warren ran blacklist targeting political enemies," one cheer read. Outside the courthouse, crowds swelled. Protesters on both sides gathered, some holding "Pam the Patriot" signs, others shouting "Warren is innocent." The nation was divided, but it was watching. Back inside, Warren met privately with her legal team. Her expression had shifted. Gone was the confident professor-turned-senator persona. In its place was cold calculation, as though she had underestimated her opponent. Pam Bondi, meanwhile, sat quietly with her team. She didn't smile. She knew better. The real war was just beginning. Later that afternoon, it was time for cross-examination. Defense attorney Marla Kent rose. She looked at Claire Robbins with disdain masked in a forced smile. "Ms. Robbins, you're claiming that a sitting U.S. senator orchestrated a vast political vendetta without anyone else knowing?" Claire didn't blink. "Others knew. They just didn't speak." Kent scoffed. "And now you do?" Claire nodded. "Because I couldn't live with it anymore." Kent moved in. "Ms. Robbins, is it true you were passed over for a promotion? That you filed a grievance with HR 6 weeks before resigning?" Bondi objected. "Irrelevant character assassination." "Sustained," the judge snapped. Kent tried again. "You mentioned documents. Yet none are signed directly by Senator Warren, are they?" Claire hesitated. "She didn't sign most of them. But she commented. Approved. Directed. Speculation," Kent barked. Bondi stood up. "Your Honor, Exhibit 41. An audio file." The room fell deathly silent. A file played. Warren's voice was unmistakable. "I want those 3 flagged. I don't care what agency we use. If they think they can oppose federal oversight, they need to be reminded who holds the cards." The courtroom gasped. Warren's jaw visibly clenched. Bondi turned to the jury. "That is the voice of the senator. And that is what political persecution sounds like in a democracy." By the 3rd day of the trial, America was transfixed. Pam Bondi had delivered 2 brutal blows, first with the whistleblower's testimony and then with the chilling audio clip of Elizabeth Warren instructing staffers to target perceived ideological opponents. For most cases, that would have been enough to seal the deal. But Bondi wasn't done. That morning, she submitted a motion to introduce evidence uncovered just 72 hours before the trial began, a declassified intelligence report showing that a private, off-the-record meeting had taken place between Senator Warren and several top federal agency heads just weeks before Project Equinox was launched. The defense team erupted. "This is a stunt," Kent growled, pounding the table. "This evidence is unverified and inflammatory." The judge leaned forward. "If it's properly authenticated, it's admissible." Bondi stood and handed over the certified chain of custody. Your Honor, she began, this report is not only verified by intelligence oversight committees. It shows that Senator Warren directly orchestrated a meeting in June 2023 where she laid out a plan to coordinate selective regulatory enforcement across 5 federal agencies. Her words were clear. We will recalibrate the economic playing field using every available lever of power. Whispers spread across the gallery like wildfire. Reporters began typing furiously. The phrase recalibrate the playing field was already trending on social media. Bondi clicked her remote again. A slide appeared, photos taken from a secure building entrance in Virginia. Warren entering through a side door. Meeting with then chiefs of the IRS, EPA, SEC, DOE, and DOJ's Civil Division. The defense will likely tell you this was a policy meeting, Bondi said. But ask yourself this, why no records? Why no schedule entries? Why cloak it in secrecy? She turned to the jury, letting the silence drive the point home. That's when the real twist came. Bondi introduced a second surprise witness, retired IRS Director Michael Fenley. Now free of federal employment, Fenley had nothing left to lose and he'd come forward just days before trial began. Mr. Fenley, Bondi asked, do you recall the June 2023 meeting with Senator Warren? He nodded. Yes. It was off the books. She insisted on no minutes being taken. And what was the purpose? To discuss how to respond to what she called institutional resistance to progressive economic reforms. She wanted us to focus on enforcement, specifically on small and mid-sized businesses owned by political donors to conservative causes. She gave us names. Names? Fenley leaned in. She had a printed list, color-coded, with donation records, media quotes, even social media activity. Gasps again. The courtroom was getting used to them. Defense attorney Kent tried desperately to stop the bleeding. She cross-examined Fenley, pressing on his motives. Isn't it true, Mr. Fenley, that you retired under investigation for misuse of funds? Fenley didn't flinch. Yes, I made mistakes, but I never abused power to crush political speech. That's the line I wouldn't cross. And when I saw others cross it, I decided the truth mattered more than my reputation. Bondi nodded slowly, her eyes scanning the jury, some of whom were visibly shaken. Outside the courthouse, emotions ran high. Protesters were now clashing. More than 30 members of Congress had already weighed in. Former President Obama had issued a carefully worded statement. I respect Senator Warren, but if these allegations are true, they represent a dangerous overreach of democratic authority. Inside the courtroom, Warren was beginning to unravel. She now whispered constantly to her attorneys. Her composed facade had fractured. This was no longer a political skirmish, it was a fight for her legacy. As the day came to a close, Bondi offered her final words before adjournment. Tomorrow, she said, we will reveal what happened to those who refused to comply with Senator Warren's plan. You'll see what happens when good Americans say no to tyranny, and how they were punished for it. The judge slammed the gavel. Court is adjourned. And across the nation, millions waited to see just how deep the rabbit hole went. The courtroom reassembled on the 4th day amid a maelstrom of national outrage and political upheaval. The energy was palpable. A mixture of vindication, confusion, and trepidation. No one in the gallery could have foreseen the seismic impact this trial was about to have on American politics and on the very fabric of trust between government and citizen. In the early hours, as reporters and spectators lined the steps of the courthouse, the headlines blared across every major network. Secret meetings, covert lists, and political blackmail. Is democracy under siege? Even mainstream commentators, usually careful in their tone, could not hide their astonishment. The nation's pulse quickened, and what once was a legal proceeding had become a battle over the soul of American democracy. Inside the courtroom, the defense team scrambled to hold the crumbling facade of their argument. Elizabeth Warren, once known as an eloquent, resolute defender of the underdog, now appeared increasingly isolated under the weight of overwhelming evidence. Her eyes, once steely with conviction, darted anxiously between her attorneys and the rapidly mounting evidence. The day began with a surprise move by the prosecution. In a move that underscored the trial's national significance, Attorney General Pam Bondi unveiled a dossier previously locked away in a secure federal vault. This dossier, compiled from anonymous tips and interagency documents, revealed not only a detailed account of how Project Equinox was conceptualized but also a series of clandestine meetings between Senator Warren and several high-ranking officials. The pages were filled with coded references to realigning economic sovereignty and neutralizing dissent through regulatory means. Pam Bondi's voice rang through the silent courtroom as she detailed the contents of the dossier. This is not a theoretical debate. These are real decisions that impacted jobs, small businesses, and the freedom of American commerce. We have documents that show clear instructions for using federal power to coerce, to punish, and to eliminate opposition. With deliberate care, she pointed to charts that linked business owners, political donors, and even educators to targeted investigations. The atmosphere grew so thick with tension that even the slightest cough was magnified. The defense fought back fiercely. Lead attorney Marla Kent argued these documents are nothing more than political innuendo, out-of-context notes, and opinions by mid-level employees. They do not prove that Senator Warren directly ordered political retribution. She attempted to sow doubt about the authenticity and context of every piece of evidence. Is it not possible, she proposed, that these were strategic moves intended to streamline oversight rather than target individuals for ideological reasons? But every word she uttered was met with a sharp rebuttal from Bondi, whose own words cut through the defense's claims like a knife. Witness after witness was called. A former regulator testified how orders were relayed in hushed tones and how individual careers were upended when their superiors questioned these orders. A once silent director of an environmental agency disclosed records of internal memos with subject lines that read Operation Equalizer and Plan Unity. Terms that experts in the room confirmed were code for the politically motivated campaign. Each testimony added a layer of detail that painted a picture of orchestrated retaliation, a covert apparatus of enforcement aimed at quelling dissent and subverting fair market principles. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, the political fallout was unprecedented. Congressional leaders were forced to hold emergency sessions. Prominent figures from both parties condemned what they described as a betrayal of public trust. Social media was awash in heated debates, with citizens decrying the use of government power as an abuse of freedom and others branding it as a necessary action against radical ideology. The nation was more divided than ever, and the implications of the trial reached far beyond the courtroom walls. On the bench, the judge listened with a measured, almost sorrowful expression. When prompted to comment, he stated, "This case is not just a legal matter, it is a reflection of our society's struggle with power, accountability, and the responsibilities of public office." His words resonated with an audience hungry for any glimmer of truth in the turbulent political landscape. As the day drew to a close, a shockwave reverberated through the courtrooms and into the halls of Congress. A secret letter had been delivered to several Senate leaders overnight. The letter, penned by a coalition of senior civil servants, decried the undermining of democratic norms and pleaded for an immediate investigation into any misuse of power, regardless of political affiliation. The existence of this letter, which had been kept confidential until now, added a potent symbol of internal dissent within the very ranks tasked with upholding the law. It was clear that the trial was now evolving into a defining moment for the country, a reckoning not just with the actions of a single senator, but with the mechanisms of power itself. As Pam Bondi wrapped up her closing arguments for the day, her voice carried the weight of a clarion call. When those entrusted with serving the people abuse that trust, the entire nation must stand guard against tyranny, be it from the left or the right. Justice is not partisan, it is the bedrock on which our future must be built. With that, the judge ordered the session adjourned, leaving every person in that courtroom, and every American watching at home, on the edge of their seat, aching for the next chapter in this national drama. Day 5 began with a haunting quiet. The courtroom, packed to capacity, felt like it was holding its breath. Outside, crowds grew in the thousands. Police presence tripled. Reporters were elbow to elbow, broadcasting live from every corner of the courthouse grounds. Even Capitol Hill had gone eerily silent, hearings delayed, meetings postponed, as all eyes turned to the final chapter of the trial that had shaken the very core of American politics. Pam Bondi entered the courtroom with a manila folder in her hands. Unlike the other days, she didn't stride in confidently. She walked with weight, knowing that what she was about to reveal would leave a permanent scar on the nation's institutions. She approached the bench and calmly said, "Your Honor, the prosecution wishes to submit our final exhibit." Judge Hall nodded. "Proceed." Bondi handed over the contents of the folder to the clerk, who projected them onto the screen. It was an email dated July 19, 2023. Sent from Elizabeth Warren's private account to a group of advisors. The subject line read, "Initiate contingency measures, disruption protocol." The body of the message was short and cold. If pushback escalates, we trigger full-spectrum regulatory engagement. We control enough levers to make them yield or vanish. Remember, public outrage is manageable. Our influence ensures favorable spin. Signed, E.W. The courtroom gasped. Pam Bondi turned to the jury. "We began this trial asking whether a public servant had abused power. I think the evidence speaks clearly. Not only was power abused, but it was wielded with terrifying calculation." Senator Warren believed she was untouchable. She believed America's outrage could be managed. But not today. Not in this courtroom. Not under this Constitution. Warren's attorney immediately jumped to her defense. "That email is out of context. It's political strategy, not a direct command to violate the law." But the damage was done. The jury had heard enough. After closing statements, Judge Hall instructed the jury with painstaking clarity. "You are not here to decide political questions. You are here to decide whether Senator Elizabeth Warren, through abuse of government authority, violated the rights of American citizens and misused federal agencies to settle political scores." The jury retired. The nation held its breath. 7 hours later, the jury returned. The courtroom went still as the forewoman stood. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Senator Elizabeth Warren, guilty on all counts." Warren closed her eyes. Her shoulders slumped. She didn't cry, but she looked broken. The room erupted. Some cheered. Others cried. Some screamed in disbelief. Outside, protests turned into celebrations and clashes. Pam Bondi, expression neutral, sat quietly at her table as the judge banged his gavel to restore order. Then came the sentencing recommendation. A full ethics investigation, permanent disqualification from holding federal office, and referral to the Department of Justice for further prosecution under federal civil rights statutes. The media flooded every network with breaking coverage. Warren guilty, political earthquake. That night, Bondi gave a short statement from the steps of the courthouse. Today, justice was not political. It was constitutional. No American, no matter how powerful, can operate above the law. That is what separates us from tyranny. Warren, in her own statement, didn't deny the verdict but framed herself as a martyr. "I stood for economic justice. I acted to protect the vulnerable. If this system cannot tolerate bold leadership, then so be it." Her statement sparked fierce debate. Some believed she'd been railroaded by politics. Others saw her as a tragic warning of how easily noble intentions can twist into authoritarianism. But the aftershocks didn't end with her sentencing. In the weeks that followed, a wave of resignations rippled through federal agencies tied to the scandal. Congressional hearings exposed additional abuses of regulatory power across multiple administrations, left and right. President Donald Trump, who had stood firmly behind Pam Bondi throughout the trial, addressed the nation. "This isn't about Republicans or Democrats. It's about restoring trust. The deep state isn't a myth. We just saw what happens when it goes unchecked." The country was polarized but oddly united in one thing: change was needed. Proposals for major reforms swept across Washington. Bills requiring transparency in interagency communications, term limits for senior bureaucrats, and even the dismantling of certain federal offices passed with rare bipartisan support. But for Pam Bondi, the story wasn't about politics, it was personal. In her office weeks later, she sat at her desk looking at a framed copy of the Constitution. An aide asked her, was it worth it? Bondi smiled faintly. "I didn't do it to win. I did it so Americans would remember what justice looks like." And that's how one courtroom, one trial, and one woman's unwavering determination changed America.